This is our second work session today, and I would like you to raise yourself around the table.
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
Jennifer Johnson, Assembly.
Debbie Osiander.
Dick Drainey. Adam Trombley.
Paul Orman, Assembly.
Chris Birch. Patrick Flynn.
And I'll hit it up to you, Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. You should each have the S version of Assembly Ordinance 2012-123 in front of you. It only differs from the original version in that it delays the effective date to middle of next month, February, and sunsets it September 15, so that if this body decides to move forward with this proposal to restrict hours of service in larger downtown government dispensary units, then it will essentially become a pilot program where we test the waters to see what effects, if any, it has on some of the behaviors defined correctly. With that,
Just a quick question. Do you have a map that could show the boundary of the area?
downtown community council boundaries,
It would help
which are
both.
basically 9th Avenue, L Street, 1st Avenue, and Gamble.
Okay, because a couple people already asked me, and I don't know the boundary.
You can always just go to
The
communitycouncil.org.
Federation, I know. I was hoping you'd do my work for me.
And we'd asked that Char provide a representative or two to speak to this first. Sylvia, Ms. Bianini, the senior here, who from Char is going to address this on this topic today?
There's going to be a few people that are going to be speaking. Our president, Ivan Ramos, and Mr. Mike Gordon is also going to.
Okay. If you could invite
Could you
them
please, come up
to
here
a
and
seat
to
there
the
at the table
table?
and give us
Who's ever going to
your
be
thoughts.
presented?
And Mr. Gordon, while we all know you, we do ask that you identify yourself for the record.
I'm Mike Gordon, the owner of Choku Charlie's.
Jess Hepper, owner of Platinum Jacks.
And I'm Sylvia Philomedes, director of Manufacturing.
And I'll have to say that the acoustics in this room are terrible, so you're going to have to speak up. Thank you.
Would you like me to go first?
Mr. Gordon, the floor is yours if you want to offer your thoughts on what we've got here and any ideas you might have.
Okay, well, essentially the way I see it is that the Assembly, in addressing what it perceives as a problem downtown, what a lot of people perceive as a problem downtown, I think is faced with a decision of either doing the expedient political corrective measure or actually solving the problem. And I think that the proposed ordinance, with all due respect to Mr. Flynn, is more of a politically expedient resolution and not a long-term resolution. As I said yesterday, the more you compress the hours of operation of the bars, the more you actually exacerbate the problem that you're dealing with here with having so many people out on the street at the same time. In years past, when we didn't have to close down until the state mandated 5 a.m., most people, sensible people, trickled out and went home between 1 and 5 a.m. Now you've compressed it to 2:30 and 3, and we're talking about compressing it even more. I think that the ordinance goes in precisely the wrong direction from what you ought to be considering. What I've described the downtown situation as lately is an unsupervised street party. And I know that you may laugh at this, but I think that some of the operators downtown are actually victims of the problem as much as anybody else. I've come downtown at night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're just, I won't say gangs, but just mobs of kids roaming all over the streets. They actually park in my parking lot, come downtown, roam around, and take a cab back out to Choku Charlie's. They're drinking the cars. A lot of the people that are causing problems are not even bar customers. I suppose that you would want to have a vibrant downtown with lots of activity in the bars and restaurants and theaters and so forth. And something that has been created that's kind of similar to what you would find in a city like Austin, Texas. But in Austin, Texas, they've got plenty of cabs, and in Austin, Texas, they've got police officers on horseback. There's a presence, and it's a visible presence. And there's not, as I can tell, a visible presence downtown when all this activity is going on. So I think we need more cabs on the street. I know that Mrs. Osiander is working on trying to correct that problem. And we need more police presence downtown. And a bar like Humpy's or a bar like F Street Station, they really haven't done anything to deserve having their serving hours shortened. This ordinance discriminates against the larger bars. It creates a situation where people will be going from larger bars to smaller bars. They'll be going from downtown to Menard. And I hate to think of the possibility of it eventually ending up with absolutely shorter hours across the board for everybody. And I'm afraid that might be where this goes. I don't get busy with my operation until 1 o'clock in the morning frequently. I bring expensive bands to Alaska. I give them transportation, housing. I have to have a certain number of hours to operate within, to make ends meet. And if we continue to shorten the hours of operation, it's not going to be possible for me to maintain my business in the present model. So if the Assembly won't consider extending hours, which would resolve this problem of having everybody pushed out on the street at the same time, perhaps the middle ground would be to consider what the industry has proposed in the past, and that is to allow people to remain on premise after closing for a period of an hour or whatever is decided in order to sober up and in order for people to be able to go out in an orderly fashion and get taxis that would be available during that hour without having to wait outside in the cold.
Mr. Birch?
I just had a question regarding kind of the competitive nature of the business, and if it wasn't the state mandated, 5 a.m., just citywide, in your experience, would all bar owners basically be obligated to stay open until 5 a.m. or from a competitive standpoint, or would they kind of go, people are peeling out of here at 2, therefore I'm closing up, sending everybody home. I just don't know the business well.
The operators would pick their hours of operation that would best meet the model of their particular business. I don't think that if I had the opportunity to stay up open until 5 a.m. again, I don't think I would do it. I might stay open until 3:30 or 4 on weekends, but 5 a.m. is pushing it. You'd have some operations that would stay open that late to cater to the swing shift, but an operation like Humpy's, for instance, or F Street, I doubt that they're going to stay open any later than they do right now, even if you allow them to.
And just if I'm, as a follow-up, is a history in Anchorage, say over the last 30, 40 years, what is it primarily been what it is now, or historically was it 5 a.m. up until 20 years ago, or
it was 5 a.m. until the present hours were adopted, and that was
January 1st, 1983.
30 years ago.
Okay.
Well, man.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
I think Mike pretty much hit the nail on the head. Really, all I can offer to that is, we brought this up yesterday in the meeting with being able to stay open later without alcohol on premise. And one of the things that Mr. Honeman brought up was, the Kodiak, I think, and there was some issues with the Kodiak in which they were able to stay open later, which I also did 2 summers ago, but the instances he was talking about is, people out in the streets, there's still fighting happening out there, because what's happening is all the rest of the bars in town now are subject to that closing time of, 2:30 to 3, everybody's getting pushed out, and they go, well, there's only one place that we can go, and that's the Kodiak. So, of course, they end up getting more of the problem being the only place that's open, where in this case, if all the bars were allowed to do that, there would really be no reason for anybody to leave, say, my establishment or Mike's establishment, if they want to stay a little later and, consume Red Bull and soda, waters. For myself, I'd probably serve breakfast where they can eat. They're not going to have a reason to go hit one spot in particular, which is going to create this mass rush and crowd, which generally is the problem with establishments like mine and Mike's and Rum Runners and the Anchor. It's that, that half an hour window that we have in which, whether it's 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock, it really doesn't matter. The fact is, we're going to open as long as we can open till, and then when we have to move people out, it's still going to push the same number of people onto the street. Whether it's 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, I don't see what difference that makes. In this case, like he said, I have the experience with staying open after hours. I did it 2 summers ago for about 3 months, and what we found is at 2:30, 3 o'clock, most people left anyway. There was no more drinking, it was late, people were starting to leave and go home anyway. The few people that stuck around, we sold a little bit of breakfast, people danced a little bit, they drank water, they drank Red Bull, and by 3:30, honestly, we were already getting ready to push people out of the door. And at that point, now we're pushing maybe 50 to 100 instead of 300, 400, 500 people out. And it's easier for the cabs to make that 1, 2, 3 runs downtown because now they have a greater window in which to pick people up, take them home, and come back. As it stands right now, the windows for cabs is really only 15 minutes, especially in the wintertime up here when people are standing outside. You have a cold night, it's 20 below, and people are standing outside hoping that that cab will make that return trip. And as they get cold enough, hey, it's time to go, we're just going to leave, which inevitably they end up driving, which is, not what any of us want. With the proposal as it stands now, the new ordinance to shut down early, this is going to create a mass movement of traffic. People actually increase drinking and driving because now you've got an hour window in which you can go to Coots, in which you can go to any of the smaller bars, Muldoon, Last Frontier, Cabin Tavern, all these bars on Muldoon. Now you've got an hour where you can jump in your vehicle and go, hey, let's hit this spot for 1 more hour and we can drink more. Are you going to wait for a cab? Probably not. That's going to cut into your drinking time.
I'm sorry, the clerk handed me a note, asked me to remind you, please restate your name for the record, sir.
Oh, Jess Hepper, Platinum Jacks.
And Mr. Hepper, just to clarify, of course, what this proposal does is not shut you down an hour earlier, it just restricts your service of alcohol for an hour. So,
which for our sake is the same thing, basically.
If I could continue, the proposal that the industry brought forward yesterday is similar to something actually I put forward several years ago. However, one of the issues we dealt with when this came forward several years ago was enforceability, because the industry said they didn't want to have to take people's drinks away. They wanted to be able to stay on premises and keep their last drink in front of them. Is that still the position of industry, or?
For me personally, with the experience of it, we had no issues with taking drinks from people at 3 o'clock. We did our last call just like we would today. And if that drink wasn't finished by 3 o'clock, I physically had my security go through the building, trash cans, sorry guys, it's 3 o'clock. You can finish this or it's done. And most people, if they're not going to finish it, they just hand it off anyway. So I don't think it's an issue really of having people, once it's known that at 3 o'clock those drinks must be finished. I think the public in general will adopt that, and they'll know it's done before then or they're going to take it, kind of a deal. I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue, honestly. It wasn't for me when I did it for 3 months over the summer. I really don't see it being that big of an issue as far as the patrons go.
Mr. Trombley?
Mr. Gordon, you've been operating in Anchorage for how long?
42 years.
Okay. So, and the reason I ask you that is because you provide a tremendous amount of a wealth of knowledge to us, who I'm only 33, so you've been operating longer than I've been alive, okay? I heard you say sorry. And as we've learned, as of January 1st, 1983, the hours got cut back. What was the catalyst for cutting back the hours? What was the logic at the time? Were we having the same problems we are now? Do you remember? I mean,
Well, not the same. They were different. You know, it was kind of in the aftermath of the pipeline period and so forth. There were a lot of after-hours operations.
for example,
It was a less domesticated community.
You never remember that? No, I don't remember that. But and the reason I ask is that, and I don't know the rules back then, but well, for example, they cut it back, okay, to the way it is now. Prior to that, was it you could serve alcohol 24/7, 365, whenever? I mean, was there a like what were we talking?
You could open up at 8 and you closed at 5.
And you could sell up until 5 a.m.
That's correct, and that is still the state mandated hours.
Okay. So what you're talking about is, as far as expanding your hours, is you're saying, look, I'll still sell my drinks to the time that it is now. Allow me to stay open for another 2 hours, or at least until 5 a.m., serve food, soda, water, that kind of stuff. Allow people the opportunity to sober out, cabs to make the rounds. You don't have a problem, from my understanding, is that you don't have a problem as an industry of stop serving drinks where you are now. You just say, let's stay open for a little bit longer and provide another service to our patrons. Is that correct? You're okay with that?
That is correct. You know, when that proposal was made by HR, I have to admit that I wasn't very much in favor of it because I didn't particularly like the idea of babysitting all these people after closing for an hour. It's going to be a little bit costly. It's going to be a bit of a problem. But certainly faced with what Mr. Flynn is suggesting, I would take that option rather than the other.
Okay.
Mr.
The
Trainee?
best solution, in my way of thinking, would be just to extend the hours.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Chief, on Wednesday, when this came up, extending the bar owners' hours, the question I have for you is, I think you guys were first
I
to last
think Mr.
time.
Trainee-
We're going to have the chief up here in a few minutes, if you don't mind waiting.
I want to ask the chief that question when he gets up here. Okay?
You know, I'd also like to say, the closing time that we're talking about now, that's handling one of the issues, but the other issue that comes up with, which Mike brought up, is the actual presence, the police presence. You know, I drove around at about 2:30 downtown to all the bars. I made a circle all the way through Coots here. I saw 2 police officers that were handling an issue down at the Panhandle during that time. I don't know how many were scheduled to be down here. If there was a call, maybe they were somewhere else at the time. But this is something that I've noticed over the years, and what's happened is there's a group of people here in town, and I'm sure the police department can tell you who that group is, but there's several groups now that are kind of running roughshod, not just downtown, but around the city. I mean, you hear it on the news. There's a shooting here, and it tends to be certain groups of people, and those groups are the ones that are causing problems with the bars at closing. They're causing problems in the bars whether or not we're closing or not. I mean, it's gotten to be an issue where we don't want to get to the point where we have to call the cops all the time, but for instance, on Saturday night, I had a group of guys come down that are no longer able to get into my bar. They came down on a party bus, they parked out front, tried to get in the building, we said no, and it all broke loose. They started threatening us, it's gonna, you know, multiple threats of life, all this stuff. So we had to call the cops, and the cops come down. At that point, we had a good group of police officers there, and they handled the situation perfectly. But the point being is that there's these groups that are ruining it basically for everybody downtown. We're talking a small majority of people that go out that are causing the majority of these problems at closing time, or maybe even not closing time in these establishments. So,
I hate to cut you off.
Sure.
We've got a couple of people that need to.
Sure.
Okay. So, Ms. Vietnamese, do you have any comments, or are you just deferring to your representative?
I'll keep right for a little later.
Okay. State your name for the record, sir.
My name is Ivan Ramos. I'm President of Anchorage Charter.
Welcome, Mr. Ramos.
Thank you. Actually, I agree with Jess and
Mike.
yes, Mike. And Mike, they pointed out all the strong points that we have regarding this issue.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming. I'd like to invite some folks from the Holy Family Cathedral to come speak to us. If you folks want to return to your seats in the audience, we'll let them come on up. Jim, Bob, if you want to grab a couple seats over there and introduce yourselves to us. Thanks, Dave. Jim, if you could introduce yourself for the record, please.
Certainly. My name is Jim Crittenden, and I'm here representing Holy Family Cathedral, which is located right in the downtown district. Louder? Excuse me. Anyway, our church has formed a safety committee in order to address our safety concerns at our church and the surrounding property. And I happen to be the chairman of the safety committee. So I have a small written letter I'll go ahead and read. We support the proposed ordinance to create a last call 1 hour before closing of the bars. The bars would then be able to allow patrons to remain in the bar for up to 1 hour before closing. The customer would then be allowed to finish his drink so long as it was ordered before the last call. And in essence, this is what we're all talking about. Holy Family Cathedral has been in its same location since 1915. Our church is located in the downtown district, situated between numerous bars, a liquor store, the bus station, and the Inlet Inn. 7 days a week, we're constantly plagued with inebriates who panhandle our church members and visitors, enter our church, and in a state of drunkenness, causing disturbances to the point of actual physical attacks on our priests. This level of aggression has increased in recent years, and we're concerned for the safety of our church members and staff. So the current bar closing hours creates a toxic environment for anyone who's unfortunate enough to find themselves in the downtown area during this time. Upon closing hour of the bars, groups of inebriated bar patrons are released in unison upon our city to wander down the alleys and enter our property. Yelling, cursing, vandalism, and fighting are common occurrences. I think everybody probably would agree to that, maybe a different perspective. But our church is staffed by up to 5 priests and brothers, all of whom live on the church property. They have to live in the midst of this war zone. And recently, one of our priests was physically accosted by a drunk who was throwing rocks at the church buildings. We're now currently implementing safety measures to protect our church members, visitors, and staff. So this issue affects not only our church, but also disrupts and causes safety concerns with the youth who reside at Covenant House, the residents located above the Muffin Man restaurant, and of course the numerous visitors and tourists who reside in the local hotels. Adopting Assemblymember Patrick Flynn's ordinance is a step in the right direction to making our city a safer place for all, and I would suggest that the last call not be restricted to the only to the larger bars in downtown, but it should be inclusive of all bars in Anchorage. Now, what I'd like to say is, in listening to Mike Gordon and everybody talk here, that I would agree there is a street party going on when bars shut down. And I don't think that there's a silver bullet answer to this, because Bob Flint and I are members of our safety committee. There isn't one answer to fix this whole issue. But this is a small portion of what we're dealing with at our church, and as you all will be dealing with here. I think there's probably a compromise that would suffice and make things work here. Possibly not necessarily closing the bars down an hour earlier, maybe extending the hour a little later for them to serve the non-alcoholic beverages and food. The key to this whole thing is not letting everybody just leave the bars at one time and
Mr.
hit the
Burns?
streets.
Thank you for your comments. We've had some discussion here that regarding the timing, and was there a problem, or did you have a problem or experience a problem prior to 1983, or do you recall if that was a, I mean,
Well,
before they started constraining the hours?
I would say, based on the history of Holy Family Cathedral, which has been there since 1950, there's always been an alcohol problem. And that's what we're here talking about, is there's an alcohol problem. But I mean, it's all based on alcohol.
Yeah, but the functionality of this ordinance is to constrain those hours of operation. And prior to 1983, as I understand it, the hours were expanded, or basically the state constrained at 8 to 5. And I guess I'm just wondering if there was if the property and the congregation were engaged at that time in the changes that are apparently causing some of the disruption right now.
I could probably answer that. I might be a little vague, but let me confer with my professional here, Bob Flint.
By the way, that isn't a working mic, that's
That's just for the TV.
for the TV.
Oh, well, that's good. Pull it up.
And
It makes me feel better talking to her with it working or not.
and please reintroduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Bob Flynn, and I'm a member of the safety committee at the Holy Family Cathedral, and I actually started going there in 1964. And the answer to Mr. Birch's question is I actually don't recall. It's been that long ago. What I do recall is sort of an eye-opener. When I got into town from Juneau as a freshman assistant district attorney, that one of the things we were prosecuting were after-hours bars, and I really scratched my head that somebody couldn't take off 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., but it turned out to be a real problem, and I realized this town had a certain toughness and aspect to it, and it always has. And I am sure that after the auction and the church was put up in 1915, it wasn't any less tough back then on drinking. So we're used to being in a certain circumstance, but I think that on an overall basis, it has become perceptibly worse over the last few months or couple of years for a number of mixed reasons, which is why it's multifaceted. But the dumping out on the streets and sort of the street party has caused some real difficulty for those people who reside in there, of which the Friars are one. I had calls from them and had an occasion to try to deal with that, but also the other residents, Coven House, of which one of the board members right down there across 8th Street, 14 kids. So,
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Gentlemen, thank you.
Mark Mew, AP.
Thanks for coming, Chief. I don't know how many of you read the column in the Anchorage Press that referred to this issue as Barmageddon. That was not my term. I advocate for someone within the industry. But Chief, if you could tell us a little bit about what your folks deal with, particularly on weekend nights at bar closure time.
Well, we call this period of time bar break. That's what we call it in our language, and it starts at 2:30 or 3, depending on what night of the week we're discussing. And I think the problem has always been, since I arrived in Anchorage in 1983, has been what happens on the sidewalks and in the streets immediately in front of the bars once they close and start ejecting people. I think if I could characterize the problem first, and then we can, I guess, talk about solutions. But we have a lot of highly intoxicated people compressed into very small areas. They're very close to each other. Over the years, I think we've seen it. I see a little bit different group downtown these days than there were back when I was walking foot patrol as a rookie in the early 80s. Back then, it was more the pipeline time had just gotten over. It was more of a blue-collar crowd. We had a lot of drug dealers downtown that would prey on folks. And I'm not saying we don't have drug dealers downtown today, but today is a younger crowd, I perceive. They're a dancing crowd. They're a rowdy crowd in a different sort of way. Just a different group of people. I think there are way more of them today than they were in those days. It was more of a slinky crowd that hung out in the shadows 20 years ago, and it's like Disneyland for young adults down there. It's a frat party. And mixed in with that, I'm sure there are predators. We see sexual predators these days. People who are trying to pick up intoxicated women and take them away. There still are fights and shootings. So we still have a lot of that, as you know. The people tend to, over the years, they've congregated in front of different bars in the downtown area. They've moved around as time has changed. But the overall effect is still there. Right now, there was a lot of folks down by 4th and D, that area. We'll see if the rum runner situation alters that problem. There's another group that's farther west in the vicinity of the, it'd be the Anchor and the Gaslight, and right around where the Legislative Affairs building is. That's pretty hot. Fair amount of activity, I think, down Platinum Jack's Way. So those are kind of the three hot spots. Of course, people travel between those three crowds. Part of the problem, as I understand it, is the availability of cabs. The cabs do come through and pick up people. At least we see them driving through a lot. Whether they're picking, how productive that is for them, I don't know. I don't know anything about cab statistics. What I've been told anecdotally is there are more cab licenses available and more cab drivers available, but the bar break is short enough that there's no incentive for a lot of folks to come out because they're going to get one run in and that's it. So I think if we explore, I'm not opposed to looking at reasonable measures that would spread out the compactness in physical compactness and amount of time, whether that's forward, whether that's backwards, how far it is, either side. I think those are things we need to debate and probably look at. But I think keeping people farther apart and giving the cabs a chance to clean them out is probably a good thing to consider. I know the safety hour was kicked around about 3 years ago. I wasn't at the police department at the time, but I was on the Public Safety Advisory Commission at the time, and so I heard some testimony on it, and I have some recollection of what we thought about, or what the commission thought about it back then. I think the police department at the time was concerned about if you had an hour where there was no alcohol, but you let the drink stay on the table, how would we police that? What if certain bars were fudging on that? Would it be our responsibility to try and go in there and figure that out? I thought at the time, I seem to remember there was a lot of resistance to just cleaning the drinks off the table. I think the police department would be much more confident in an experiment of this kind if the bars were willing to clean those drinks off the table, and if people were going to sit there for a while and sober up, drink coffee or have breakfast or whatever, and that slowed the pace of the trickle out on the street. I think it's probably worth looking at. So maybe I'm rambling now.
Training?
You've answered chief of the questions that I had for you. I just asked Dennis to take a look at this and see if there's a way to put some sort of cursive measure into people at bars that try and cheat beyond the serving time. So if Dennis could take a look at that for us and come back to public safety, that would be helpful as we try and craft something. Because I think we do need to take care of the amount of time. Because right now I've been down with the police department and bar break is crazy. I've been down there a few times myself. I walked with Dennis and George down there once recently. I go down there every 3 or 4 times a year. There was a time, and I'd like to get back to this time, when we had foot patrol downtown 24/7. We don't have that now. I got to tell you though, one officer downtown at bar break is not going to do much. And as soon as he makes an arrest, he's out of commission, and he'll make an arrest fast. It's a target-rich environment.
and then he's gone, and by the time he gets back from court and jail and all that, it's over. So this last summer, we thought things were getting out of hand. We held over swing shift, 4 hours of overtime every Friday and Saturday night for most of the summer. Put 4 cops downtown on top of what the patrol roster showed. I had to pay overtime to do that. I don't know that I can continue doing that. You guys have been watching our budget. You know that we're running things really, really, really tight these days. I would like to have a bigger police presence, and we'll try and figure out a way to do that. But I also want to throw out the notion that, we try and go where the problems are. I mean, I'm not saying we don't, but are we just enabling bad behavior by being there to take the consequences away from folks that want to liquor everybody up, throw them out the door, and make them the police department's problem? So where that balance line is, I don't know. But I would like to work with the bars on this, and if we can share some responsibility. If they want to soften the exodus a little bit, so that we can manage it better, I think it's worth talking about.
Mr. Trombley?
A question for you, Chief. You said you used to walk foot patrol down there in the early 80s. Were you there prior to when the bars were able to serve until 5 a.m.? And then were you there before that? I don't want to age you or anything, but
I arrived at the APD in February of 1983.
Okay.
But I did tend bar in Homer in the late 70s. I don't remember any lack of customers at 5 in the morning. That's just my recollection.
Well, the reason I ask is, and maybe you remember speaking with your colleagues at the time, but is whether or not they saw a dramatic difference in crime when they did stop serving at 5 and kicked it back to where it is now. I mean, was there a dramatic difference downtown?
I don't know of anybody left that would have those recollections. I don't know.
Okay. And then I do have a question for Ms. Tucker and maybe Mr. Wheeler, maybe you know this, but one of the things that we had an issue with on the sidewalk ordinance was that, we had to make it compact in order to make it legal. We couldn't make it citywide. So, never mind then. I answered my own question.
Okay.
That's how smart I am.
Thank you. Well, I'll get to this another comment in a moment, but that's on the fact that I did kind of grow up here in that era, and I remember that drinking age at that time was 19, and it's allegedly rumored that some people younger than that age may have frequented or slipped in times to experiment. But
do you know anybody like that?
Let me just say that I sent an email to all of you last night that apparently didn't make it out from my Gmail transferring into the Muni mail and must have timed out or something. So I'm just going to give you a Public Safety Committee. We met Wednesday, 2 topics, and I'll send you the other one. I'll make sure it gets sent back to you, so I'll read through this synopsis. But the downtown restrictions, the alcohol service drew a large crowd, obviously, mostly CHAR members, I was assuming. I did get a sign-in sheet, and we have their names and information. The overall comments from these folks is that the ordinance is too excessive in limitation with no regards to what would happen as patrons rush to other smaller establishments or leave downtown to midtown or other locales. That's been testified to. And B, doesn't properly address specific problem bars. In summary, they view it as a discriminatory and a buckshot approach that does more harm than good. For your information, I asked these folks for some suggested solutions as the problems in downtown bar community is worsening and something needs to be done. And the vast majority that I think testified to more APD presence downtown between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. And most of the folks stated that the bars possibly could initiate a grant from their funds or other funds to CHAR or Anchorage Downtown Partnership to pay for the extra 2 to 3 officers it might call for, depending on the chief's recommendation. And then secondly, of course, allowing bars to, we've heard already, staying open for reason be no selling alcohol. And of course, I think it's been spoken to, the sticky wicket is how do we make sure that there's no alcohol left on that period of time. No person, group, or agency testified in support of the ordinance proposal, even with the sunset provision. To the contrary, it was unanimously opposed by those in attendance. I noted that Chief Mew was there. He's already spoken, so you can read through it. I also noted that Mr. Gordon was there and gave a comment that, and he's already stated the drunken, kind of a frat house street party, and that he was concerned that it might, even though he wasn't in the downtown area, that those problems would migrate to his location. He wasn't in favor of it. So it came to the recommendation of our Public Safety Committee. Mr. Hall was present by telephone. Mr. Greg Jackson was in travel on official business and excused. So myself, Mr. Trainee, were physically there. Our recommendation from the committee is to explore the options that were presented and other options, and perhaps start with them in the downtown area. I think Mr. Trombley was alluding to, can this be applied citywide? Await public hearing testimony from the public and any communication from those affected community councils and stakeholders. We heard from Holy Family Cathedral, we're appreciative of that. And again, I mentioned who was there. Now, saying that, I want to get personal for just a second. I'm going to give you an experience that I've had. I was there with Howard Steppe at closing hours most of the time when I worked on the weekends, mid-shift, swing shift, and the bar break hours were very colorful. And that was beyond the foot patrol hours typically. It was usually officers in mobile cars, and you had to because of the reasons the chief testified to. Take a little heat off the chief, and that, I understand it was a statement that, this is not just a police problem after people leave, and I said this at the Public Safety Committee. This isn't just a downtown assembly district problem, this is a community problem. Our constituents are wanting to go out and have a good time somewhere, and it's our responsibility as a community to make it as safe as environment as possible. I see the balance between a couple of heavy hitters in industry. There's the bar industry that wants to make as much money as they can while they're open. Mr. Gordon testified, I have to have a certain amount of hours to sell in order to make my business work. There's a cab industry that they have to have a certain amount of business in order, and the drivers physically have to pick up so many fares to pay their rent, if you will, their lease for the day. So there's a lot of conflicts in what's going on. And what's really happening is the community, and the same problem was, and I recall growing up in that era, the reason that the hours were shortened in this community primarily was due to the same problems we're seeing now. It was not a healthy environment, it was not a safe environment, and there were a lot of concerns of people leaving at 5 a.m.
That's the question.
The comment I said I reserved to Mr. Birch's at the end is that this is an issue where we on this body, this community needs to do something about this problem. And it's our responsibility as elected officials to do something and take some officious action. And I believe that it's necessary, I do. What that answer is, I don't know. I've urged the community from Char and the alcohol industry to give us some creative ideas. We had a couple that day, and I'd like to work with any and everybody on this body to see that. So having said that, watched a lot of this going on.
Mr. Flynn, is there anybody else you?
That's all I had lined up.
And any other questions? I have a question for the chief if no one has one. You mentioned as far as, and we had talked 3 or 4 years ago about leaving the bars open for sort of the trickling out efforts and shutting, putting the lights bright, et cetera. And as assembly, we really only have control over the conditional use permit. If we built that into a conditional use permit, would you still feel as, the whole business you were mentioning, the cheating the system, with ABC enforcing it, would you feel that we would cover some of that problem as far as serving after the closing hour? And I'm just trying to...
Well, it's hard to predict the future. I don't know, if the industry is serious about making this work, they could make it work and there wouldn't be any cheating. But we would feel better if they swept the drinks, because that way a patrol officer walks in, they can see there's no drinks out there. And, then we don't have to figure out, well, what's in that drink? That guy's nursing something, I wonder if he got it, if he just kept it there for 45 minutes or if he just got it 5 minutes ago. And then we'd be saying, do we want to run undercover operations in here to figure out if somebody's still selling after the closing hours? It's just easier if it gets swept and they're eating bacon and eggs and drinking coffee. But, these are the things we've got to debate.
The other question I have, and what was brought up, was as far as there's another element that we maybe can address as bar, as part of the liquor license, and that's an element that seems to be a party element that goes around town and drinks out of their car, or something of that effect. Do you have a comment about that? And I don't want to use the G word on this.
No, I'll be honest with you, I don't know about a crowd of people that drives around with, hangs out downtown and brings their own drinks down there. I'm not saying that people haven't done it or that doesn't happen with individuals, but I'm not aware of any of an organized group of some kind that's their whole thing. Maybe some of my guys who work the street would know, but I haven't heard it.
Thank Any other, Ms. Alexander?
Recently, there was a move on how the state dealt with alcohol permits, and which department had control over that.
Yes.
And there was a fair amount of discussion about potential impacts on enforcement. Have you seen anything yet?
I think the
It
jury.
just started what?
January 1st.
In January, okay. I don't know if that's something we should be talking about or not. So I'd like feedback. I know you maybe don't have much time to do it.
Well, we're watching that and trying to make up our mind if anything's changed yet or not. I just exchanged emails with Director Cote from the ABC board this morning. There's some meetings coming up, and those may perhaps be some of the things that.
Could you share that with the Assembly? I'm really interested. We can often weigh in on state issues and have some impact, so be helpful. Thank you.
I don't have an answer for you yet, but it's been, we have wondered from the beginning if it would change anything at all, and we're kind of watching to see.
Thanks.
Mr. Birch?
There's been some discussion here today about the number of officers, and you'd mentioned that, if you have one officer downtown, he gets, tangled up with an arrest, then he's basically out of there. What is the typical number of officers that, I just don't know the overall number in the bowl that are on a shift, even not counting the holdovers, but when you hold over from a prior shift, but on in that 2 to 3, 4 o'clock.
On a really good day, we're running about 26 or 27 right now, and it's sometimes 21, 22.
21 or 22. Is it fair to say that most of the action, if you will, is kind of in downtown between midnight and 5 o'clock in the morning, or are they distributed citywide? That
Well,
22 officers?
we size our patrol areas and staff them. Some areas we put more than one officer in that area. We size those beats based on calls for service data to show, where the busier areas are. And the areas tend to be smaller and have more people in them the closer you get to downtown, because there is a lot of activity here. There's also activity in other areas besides downtown. Spinard's a little busier than other areas. Mountain View, Fairview have traditionally been relatively busy compared to, there's other areas where almost nothing ever happens. So, our deployment kind of is built around that. But then, not every night's the same. Sometimes things happen and everybody picks up. It just goes where the business is. But I think you're going to find most of the cops are going to be in the north sector, are going to be gravitating towards the downtown area around Barbeck time. They're going to hedge to closer to their northern boundaries, even if they're not a downtown unit, because chances are something's going to happen downtown and they're going to have to leave their areas to support it, and so they tend to pre-position themselves.
Now, when you say pre-position, are they proactive from the standpoint of getting out and getting out of the car and actually just kind of milling around with everybody at the same time?
Call load permitting, yes, but...
Pardon me?
I said call load permitting, yes, but I must tell you that it's... Well, when the perfect work came out in 2010, we had a unobligated time average of 26%, and but that's not every hour of every day. And I had to go back and look at that report to see what it said about how much unobligated time we have at 3 a.m. on a Friday night. But anecdotally, I'll tell you, not much. That's probably the highest spike for the day, and my guess is those guys and gals are running call to call pretty hard about that time. So they don't have, on Sunday morning at noon, the patrol officer probably has time to get out and walk around downtown. There's nothing happening there. But, so that's not evenly distributed. I would suspect they don't have a great deal of time on the busy nights to get the cars along.
Okay, and then lastly, somewhere I'd seen some discussion about off-duty police officers working in a security capacity, and I know one of my pet peeves is that we don't have a better integration with private security contractors, and I don't know if that's I'm not sure where the problem lies with that, but do you see any hitches or any potential for private security contractors to work with with the industry, if you will, to assist and support? Maybe they do that already. I just don't know.
Are you talking about off-duty APD working for the bars?
As
Moonlight.
opposed to that versus having security, whoever provides security. I mean, there's private security concerns all over.
We don't have any problem at all working with the private security people that any establishment wants to hire. We are very, very opposed to having cops moonlighting as bar security or bar bouncers. Right? And I could go on that for a while, but that's the bottom line.
But they're still working at the Sullivan Arena flagging traffic though, right?
Oh, they are.
Okay, so I mean, it's not the question of moonlighting, it's just where they're moonlighting.
The question in my mind is if we're at the Sullivan Arena, we're there to handle the problems of traffic that just comes and goes out of the Sullivan Arena. We don't have also the mandate to control the hockey rules, and we don't regulate what's going on inside there. But we have responsibilities to enforce the liquor laws in Anchorage, and we have money reimbursed from the state of Alaska to do just that. So if we have a mandate and a charge and we're paid to enforce liquor offenses in Anchorage, and we're also working for a bar at the same time, and they're paying the freight, I think we've got a conflict of interest there, and I don't have anything to do with it. That's what I think the difference is between the Sullivan Arena and working with the bars. Now, as I've said before, if we want to put people downtown and we can pay for it out of our budget, fine. And if we need extra help and the downtown bars want to help with that, I don't have a problem with it, but I don't want this cop knowing that he's been paid by that bar, and that bar owner can say, hey, I don't want you doing this, I want you doing that. So I would like a degree of separation. One suggestion that's come up, it might not be the only such suggestion, and I don't know if Downtown Partnership wants to do it, so I can't speak for them. But if the businesses wanted to contribute to a fund and the Downtown Partnership administered a grant to the police department to provide extra patrol for all businesses in downtown, and the cops were free to go where they felt the problems were and do what they needed to do to protect property and lives downtown, I don't have a problem with that. But what I don't want is an officer, say, in front of, we'll use rum runners since they're not in business anymore. So let's say a rum runners is paying for an officer to be at rum runners. And if that officer sees a drunk across the street or somebody get in a car and he wants to go make a drunk driver's arrest, I don't want the rum runners staff saying, no, you let that drunk driver go. We're paying for you. We want you here in the bar. Or if the officer decides the rum runners is committing a violation inside and wants to go arrest the rum runner staff, they say, you can't do that. You're working for me. You know, I don't want those things to occur. I don't want even the appearance that those things are possibilities. So,
but integrating with a private security contractor would be a problem.
No, of course not. And we do those sorts of things in other areas besides.
But the question really is how many of the 22 people on shift at that time of the day are available to the downtown during that?
Oh, well, you know, there's probably, of the 22, there are, let's say, maybe 4 are working the areas that are close to downtown, but they're chasing calls. They're not out of their cars doing bar patrols. You know, they're going to calls, whatever's happening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Flynn and everyone, and we'll take a 5-minute break before we come back and discuss MIAP.
Hi there, regardless.
Oh, I know you.
I feel strong.
I can tell.